Right, good morning everybody and welcome to this reconvened resources scrutiny meeting. Just a couple of points to start with. The first one is that we have apologies from Craig Cheney, who says that he and his family are suffering from a very heavy cold and that we wouldn't want him here. I wouldn't ever go as far as saying that of an executive member, but fully understand and send him our best wishes. Second item is, it's a bit early in the morning, but there are a selection of small mince pies on the table around the corner for members and indeed officers to partake of, just in case anyone's forgetting that Christmas is approaching. So please do help yourselves and enjoy. I don't want to take any home. So. Oh, and Stephen has just prompted me there will be a fire alarm test at 10 o'clock as normal, which we can all safely ignore unless it continues. Right, so the items that we identified for discussion today are on the agenda, and the first item is the transformation programme. Now, Stephen made a presentation on this to OSM 10 days ago, and I think possibly Mark was the only one at that meeting, so I've indicated, Mark, that it might be helpful for Stephen to just run through those slides again so that all members are up to date with the basic background, and then we can go into those questions. So, Stephen, if I hand over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I will try and breeze through this because obviously today is a budget consultation scrutiny, and I'm sure you'll want to get to the budget elements, and I'm joined here by the three relevant officers who are leading these programs. So I'll just provide some overview, and I may ask them to come in and just do a very quick 1 minute on each of their programs and then leave as much time as possible for questions. So this is about providing you with an overview of the transformation portfolio of programs within the Council. As Councillor Gollop said, we've just recently gone to OSM with the same information. So I'll just quickly give the context. Next slide, please. So obviously you know about this. Like many local authorities, after decade of austerity, COVID, cost of living crisis, we've got a substantial financial challenge to meet our statutory duties and deliver services within the budget. And as you also are aware, there is unsustainable demand in some areas for those statutory services without real transformation, particularly in the areas of adult social care, children education and the provision of temporary accommodation. We've also committed to significant reductions in the cost of running our corporate estate and to an ambitious land and property disposal programme in order to generate the capital receipts that we need as part of our 5-year MTFP. The Council's budget, worth noting, for 2022-23 was increased by 12.8 million as up to P7? No. In total, sorry, that's 22-23. It was increased by 12.8 million, and the actual outturn exceeded the budget by a further 3 million. So we've got a history in previous years of having to increase our budget in year and find one-off mitigations. And we have obviously a finite and relatively small level of reserves. So living within our means is more important now than ever before. And in 2023-24, we committed to £37 million worth of savings. And noted, as you will all be aware, that there were additional risks and potential budget pressures through which have now materialised through this year. One final piece of context is that in 22-23 we delivered 66% of our planned savings. We're currently on track for around 80% this year, so we're showing an improved trend in the delivery of what we set out to achieve, although clearly we need to get to a 100% for it to be something that we can then rely on in future years. I won't mention the high needs block and dedicated schools grant because that is a separate programme, but clearly that is a significant issue as well. So I will just moving on to what we call our top four. The next slide, please. The three key areas, as I mentioned, adult social care, children's education and temporary accommodation. It became clear as we did the budget setting process this time last year that those areas were going to require an intense focus. And the challenge is all about how we use all the levers at our disposal to mitigate and manage demand pressures both now and in the future, and look at our operating models to deliver financial sustainability. Those 4 programmes, the 3 plus property, counted for 62% of the savings that we needed to make this year. So the 37 million, 62% of that was in the 4 programmes. And so it made sense for us as a leadership team to really focus in on those 4. There is a long tail of transformation programmes within the council, but those top 4 are clearly the most important. In June 2023, Cabinet approved an investment of up to 21.4 million to fund transformation. As of now, we forecast to spend somewhere in the region of 10 to 12 million. The final numbers will obviously be confirmed at year end. So we've spent a significant proportion, but there is transformation reserve left. So if I can, Chair, just ask colleagues to give us a very quick update on each of the 4, remembering this is a budget consultation scrutiny, so there are other scrutiny commissions clearly which will look at adults and children. But Hugh, if you could just talk us quickly through adults and care.
Yep, morning all. Sorry, I'm a little bit husky. Yes, adult social care transformation. Variously heard quite a lot about this over the last couple of years. This programme builds upon strategic and operational improvement work that's been underway since about 2020. This 5-year programme, we've developed it this year to deliver at scale and pace more swiftly given the present day budget challenges. We're working to ensure that demand is responded to proportionately and fairly and in a timely way. We're working on the local supply of services, our care market, to ensure it's sufficient and robust enough to withstand the challenges that are presented to it. We're working to make the most of what we directly provide, our in-house services, and we're also responding to major national health and care workforce challenges. This year, we've engaged a delivery partner, People 2. People 2 are adding expertise and, most importantly, capacity to help us to do all of this at pace. The challenging budget situation continues, but all of the above actions, through those, we've already regularised the adult social care budget. We're not seeing galloping overspends as we have done in prior years, and we're on track to deliver against the savings targets that we've set in 23-24. But we still have huge challenges to meet upcoming demand in more cost-effective and efficient ways and to address the high costs of care. So you'll see a list of key achievements in the next slide. I'm not going to talk about them in detail. We've done a lot of work to rationalise our direct provision, to reduce our day-to-day commitments by reviewing care arrangements with high-cost providers, and to develop more cost-effective local solutions. And we're reviewing and improving our systems and processes to minimise rework and waste. We've got a new single framework for commissioning, care and support services, which is also being used by the NHS. And through this, we'll drive better value for the around 200 million gross that we commit each year to care services. So a lot of work underway. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you. If we carry on just through them, and then obviously there's plenty of time for questions. So Ness, our transformation lead for children's.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone. So in regards to our families programme, and I'll keep it all brief, obviously we have scrutinised through both audit committee, we have a transformation board, but obviously the more scrutinised through people scrutiny. The programme itself covers both DSG and non-DSG, but today is going to be focusing on the non-DSG elements. It's broken into 3 areas, looking at our operating model, which also looks at our practices and also looks at opportunities around commercialisation. Then the key focus is around better demand management. This links into both national and local challenges that we have. And then improving our partnerships and our commissioning arrangements. Some key focuses of the programme over the next couple of years, as you can imagine, is around things like home to school travel, our provision and sufficiency around our placement costs, and also how we can expand and get more foster carers into the system. Both the programme does look at our internal processes and redesign of those processes to make us more efficient and effective. But I suppose the key aspects is around sort of we're looking at both resource and financial sustainability in the long term.
Thank you. And finally, albeit 2 programmes, John.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. So the first one is the property programme. So given the financial pressures on the council that were set out by Stephen at the start, we've got a programme of reviewing our estate, looking at potential disposals and seeking to deliver revenue savings. So we brought in, and also I should say, to implement a corporate landlord model type of approach, which is an important element of it. So we brought in some external expertise at the start of this year as part of the transformation programme who helped the team with a review of the estate. We have come forward with a series of proposed disposals, all of which come through in a regular series of cabinet papers. So all of the properties that we're seeking to dispose of come through in a cabinet paper and have been coming through throughout the year. The key elements of the programme that I just pull out, so we've got quite an extensive office rationalisation programme that has involved in the first stages a consolidation of activity, particularly in City Hall and in Temple Street. Those initial stages have progressed successfully. Our intention is also to lease out some of the spare space that's available in Temple Street. The final point I'd say about this programme is the context is quite a difficult property market. We have also had to look at areas which don't have a material adverse impact on revenue, because obviously a number of the current uses of our estate do bring additional revenue. And we've particularly and increasingly been working with my colleagues here at looking at where our estate can best be used to support the other transformation programmes as well. So the 2 that my colleagues have talked about, but also the temporary accommodation programme, which I'll go on to talk about, if that's okay. So the temporary accommodation programme, I mean, I'll just give some key facts. I think members, you're all familiar with it. We have approximately 1,300 residents in temporary accommodation at the moment. It's increased by 87% since the start of the pandemic. It has a significant annual subsidy loss for the council, predicted to be some 11 million in this current financial year. We've brought forward a series of projects to try and address that within year. We've used the housing revenue account delivery pipeline to try and bring forward additional capacity. We've done some innovative projects like leasing some properties off the hospital trust in order to make that available for temporary accommodation. We've also had a significant review of our exempt accommodation framework, where we think we can bring a lot of improvements and some better value for money for the council. And there's a number of other programmes in chain. And what I would say about those is we're looking both with Denise and finance colleagues, but also about potential other sources of funding to see if we can secure other potential funding to bring forward additional capacity. I think we've made good progress in improving our efficiency and effectiveness internally, but the key thing is to try and bring that additional capacity in to bring a longer-term solution.
Final point is that this is a big programme, as I mentioned, 21.4 million, and I commissioned PwC in the summer to do a quick sprint on to take a look at the quality of our programme delivery and our governance. That report has literally just been finalised. It is effectively looking at, are we making the best use of the money? Are we clear about how we see benefits being realised? And does the governance of the overall approach seem to them to be best in class, or at least in line with what we would expect? So we will be taking the results of that, which we haven't yet shared with our leadership board because it's literally just off the press now. Steph has led that work because Steph is the lead for our project portfolio programme and projects team who provide the PMO support to these programmes. Steph, therefore, has cliented that work with PwC, but we will be using that report and the recommendations to build the next iteration of our transformation programme, because as you can see, this is not work that will end this financial year. We will expect to see this work continue into next financial year. One of the other parallel things we are considering at the moment is the original investment. What, if any, additional investment may be required to continue the work that is obviously in some cases far from finished, and that will subject to the discussions that we are having at the moment, will potentially result in something in the draft budget that you will see next year. But that work is not yet concluded. So that's it, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, for that whistle-stop tour. I think one of the challenges we recognise is that we could probably do a two-day sort of forensic questioning session on the transformation programme and still only be scratching the surface. So it's a slight challenge for us to focus and target questions.
Sorry, yes, I should say the final slide does effectively recognise that in the context of the programmes being subject themselves to scrutiny. So people's scrutiny has taken the adults and children's one. We certainly recommend that communities and GNR scrutiny look at temporary accommodation and property, and that will be much more of an opportunity to go deeper into these programmes. So,
yeah. So, Simon, I think, in a sense, the main direction of our questioning is in terms of the achievability, and one of the disadvantages of me being around nowhere near as long as Helen, but not too far off, is that I can go back over 20 years, and my first year on council, at least 3 of these 4 items were being debated vociferously at the time, and some of the proposals that are now being put forward were actually being recommended at the time. I'm particularly on the adult care. I'm very much aware that with Helen and Hugh that we now have an absolute grasp of the drivers that it's fair to say we perhaps didn't have at that time. So I can see how we now know what it is we need to do in a way that we possibly didn't even when we were encompassing it in reports. But I think from our financial scrutiny point of view, the question is how realistic is it to expect that delivery when actually we see it is a massive amount of issues over a long period of time that need to be remedied. And I know that's a very general question, but I'm sure you have rehearsed those answers to have got to this stage, and I think that's the bit we need some reassurance on. Is that really going to be achievable in the next financial year?
I mean, I'm obviously anyone will be able to chip in here at this point, but I think as a group of officers, I would say we've been acknowledging that things have sometimes been put into plans with a level of aspiration and not necessarily backed by the granular operational, work stream, sort of the boring stuff that gets into a Gantt chart, and you need to have the detail to be able to come back up to the top and say, is what you're telling me realistic and achievable? And I think as with probably every local authority grappling with multiple wicked problems and a requirement to deliver a balanced budget, you sometimes see things move on so fast that you can almost lose track of where you started the year. So we have this concept of cost avoidance, for example, which is a term that I didn't know about until I joined the local government. It's not the same as cashable savings. We also have a budget built on achievement of a saving on a demand forecast that we only know one thing, is the demand forecast will be wrong. And if you take those 2 examples, it makes it challenging. I think what we've successfully done this year is we've been able to put in place an improved understanding collectively of what the difference is, and making sure we're all using the same language. It sounds incredibly boring, but it's essential. And then as a result of which, the improvements are coming through as far as where we start the year and where we end the year. It is a slow journey, as much about culture as it is about capacity. But capacity is a part of it, because unless you build a plan that recognises that everyone is already busy doing the business as usual, you will ask people to do transformation work at the edge of their working day, and you will guarantee failure. So everybody is trying to get around the difference between doing your day job and delivering a step change in how that day job needs to function. We're getting better.
You sound as though you've experienced some of our previous transformation programs. Helen.
Thanks, Jeff. I think it picks up from what Stephen just said, because I know that sometimes people roll their eyes, and I know when the transformation programme came to Osm, there was some question about having consultants in to do this. And just to point out to those people who weren't around, I wasn't responsible for adult social care in the period that Jeff's talking about. But I think Mark was here as well for much of that time, that we had consultants in. Sometimes you felt that they were writing a report that could have been for Birmingham or something, and just taken Birmingham out and put Bristol, and then they left you with the plan and then they went. So it's important that you might have noted on the slide about our delivery partner. So it's the people too aren't consultants. We don't think of them as consultants. They are sitting alongside to give that additional capacity that Stephen has just talked about. And that is about, obviously, putting a transformation rather than a quick fix in, so that we start to do things very differently to make these changes sustainable, because that's the important thing, isn't it? That this isn't just something that's going to get us past next February or even beyond. It's about doing things differently. And Hugh will probably say it himself if I don't steal his thunder, but quite often Hugh uses the expression, we spend a lot doing the wrong thing as well as we can, and actually we've got to start doing the right thing for people. And I think carrying both our service users, I hate that word, our people, our residents that we serve, and our providers and health partners with us on that journey is equally important. So I think what I'm saying is there is a difference. It isn't just words. A delivery partner, to me, feels very different, having been at the receiving end of lots of consultants that have come in over the years. That it's a different relationship, and I think the staff feel that as well.
Thank you, Helen. Questions? Martin.
Thank you. Firstly, just to note, I mean, it is said, it's been recommended that temporary accommodation is looked at community scrutiny, but it's not in the current programme. That programme was set last summer, during the summer. I would welcome it coming there so we can have a proper look at it. We've only one more meeting currently scheduled of that scrutiny, and it's not on that agenda. So if we can do something to make sure it is, that would be really helpful. Secondly, just for clarification, I'm not familiar with the difference between an exempt accommodation framework and another accommodation framework. Just for clarification, please.
Apologies, Councillor. It's emergency accommodation framework I should refer to.
Sorry, I might have misheard that. Yeah, sorry.
I'm not sure you did, but apologies if I got it wrong.
Thank you very much, everyone, for that presentation. Just a question about the property estate review. The paper identifies that there's this tension between different departments potentially, in that some properties might be able to be used by other departments to deliver revenue savings of their own. I'm wondering what processes are in place to help identify those, and what process there might be for them to take those useful properties out of the capital disposal pool.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, essentially, Councillor, it's as the Chief Executive said at the start, so one of the key elements of the transformation programme has to have that more joined up and council-wide approach to these various tensions, as you referred to them. So we've been working very closely between us. As properties come forward, they are offered internally, aren't they, on a sort of bidding type process in terms of the potential for alternative use. Then ultimately we bring that back together to look at how they could best be used. We're still developing that, but I mean there's a number of potential opportunities in the framework, and essentially we won't dispose of things that could be used for alternative beneficial uses. I think it's fair to say there's the tension as well is between the capital value and the revenue benefit. So that's the trade-off and the area that we've been looking at.
Just to add, I think actually a little tension's quite good. I would expect that 5 years ago there wouldn't have been any tension and buildings just would have been sold. And I think the fact that we have all of our senior leaders, officers, and all of their cabinet members actively discussing what can we do with this property is a good thing. We struggle sometimes because there are so many considerations and so many rules about, you know, where does property need to be held, what constitutes the correct return on investment, etc., etc. But we are making progress, and the decision around Gorham, which we made around children's, is an example of something we probably wouldn't have done 3 years ago. We might have talked about it, but I doubt we would have done it.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Chair. Just to go back to the points you were making in regard to the deliverability of these savings, I think I'd like to say that, you know, we can evidence quite significantly that this activity is already working. We have got a regular and stable budget. We've still got a lot to do in order to bring it into the kind of levels of spend that we're expecting in future years. But this year, at the moment, the budget is looking to potentially overspend by about 1.5%, which is a lot of money on a £200 million budget, but it's still significantly better than the ups and downs of the budget that we used to get in prior years. As was just being discussed earlier, we've got 4 areas, sites or potential vacant accommodations that we're looking at in adults. We're working with registered providers. We've got 49 units of specialised supported accommodation in the pipeline, some of which one came online this year, and there'll be more next year and more in upcoming years. Each one of those will enable somebody who is at present living potentially out of area, usually in very expensive supported accommodation or even NHS funded locked accommodation, to come back and live in Bristol and at significantly lower cost, but also live in their own homes and near their communities and enjoy all the benefits of citizenship that some of them haven't had for decades. So that kind of work is bringing is not only better for people, but it's also bringing our budget into line. In the last year, since September 2022, thanks to support from colleagues in housing, we've stepped down about 45 people from higher level and institutional care services into their own tenancies in our own council housing. So at the moment we're on about 3 a month for those. There's equivalent work happening with care leavers and, as John mentioned, in regard to temporary accommodation. So there really is a joined up council-wide approach to this kind of thing. Each one of those variable savings in here and in those moves, but I think we estimate the full year effect of that number is getting on to £1 million a year. So there's a lot of activity that's going on that is right positioning our care and ensuring that the work that needs to happen happens in Bristol, and all the economic multipliers that you get benefit Bristol. We have seen a just about 4% increase in demand in the last 12 months, 3.9%. That amounts to about 210 people. That 3.9 increase in demand in regard to numbers of people, at the same time we've seen about a 1.9% increase in spend, because our unit costs are gradually coming down as a product of the commissioning work we're doing. So quietly but confidently, this work is starting to take shape. Now, with the People 2 activity that we've got in place, we think we'll make much faster inroads into some of the other system and operational work that will enable us to deliver more.
So, Hugh, I'm not intentionally being perverse, honestly, but having questions on the one hand whether you can achieve, you've put forward such a convincing argument as to why you can achieve that I then come to the other argument of, are you being ambitious enough? I mean, if we can achieve that, could we actually be aiming to spend more to bring about more savings more quickly?
Well, and that's a lovely question. And, you know, we are very ambitious. And, you know, the stretch targets that we conceive of with the people to work are quite significant. I mean, they will involve investment, but investment does pay off. So I think that what we're doing at the moment is being relatively level and not modest. I think we're stretching, but I think that we are offering up activity that we think we're confident can deliver. So if we can get our systems and operational processes right, if we can minimise waste, if we can work more effectively with our NHS partners in the future, another area that we've at the hospital interface improved quite significantly in recent months, then there's a lot of possibilities for the future.
Because I say that in the context, Stephen, you talked about the culture changing. And members, I'm really only looking at the things we've discussed over probably the last 2 years, which is that we see invest to save is becoming even more and more critical as a way of dealing with the pressures that we have. And I suppose is the question of, do we have the resources within the authority to assess those risks and manage to get the best returns possible as quickly as possible?
Which I think is the exact point about having some external validation of what we do and whether we're as efficient as and effective as we need to be. So the answer to the question is we will need to change how we work. It'll be an evolution, but it is going to need to happen in the next 12 months because there's a lot more that we can do, but against the backdrop of having to meet statutory duties and the fact in the case of adult care where there is actually a new regulator who will be starting to regulate the service now effectively, we have to recognise that we're trying to do many things at the same time and it's going to put lots of pressure on already stretched services, which is exactly why we need transformation resources, because these are just like they're like a physical investment. You buy a building and you expect to get a return. This is an intangible investment in a model and a system that will also deliver a return. We can't do it within existing budgets. It has to be seen as over and above, but you need to be confident that you're going to get a return on that investment.
Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The adult social care programme talks about managing demand, managing supply, and the service redesign. And I agree, they all need proper investment. They all need to be managed really carefully and happen at the right time while the service is still going on. But one of the recommendations also from people too, I think, was a communication plan. And we need that both inwards to the staff and the teams and so on, but also to the service users. And I think we've already seen that people get pretty agitated and rightly worried when they think either choices are being denied or they're being channeled into something that wasn't what they thought they would be doing. And we've probably all experienced it, an elderly relative with all sorts of extra needs, care needs and kind of ailments and so on, that they get really agitated and upset and they think choices are being taken away from them. So how is that communication to our residents being managed?
Thank you. Yes, it's a very important question, and it won't have escaped anybody's notice that in recent weeks we've been engaged in a debate in regard to our fair and affordable care policy that actually has become a national debate, and it may sound perverse, but I do welcome it because it is as a product of our efforts to develop relationships that are suitably trusting, that we can gain proper insight from the people that draw upon our services. Another local authority near us, Devon, introduced a fair and affordable care policy 2 or 3 years back without a squeak. And it's because they weren't attempting to engage properly and gain insight from the people they were working with. So at the same time, we're making absolutely clear our statutory responsibilities under the Care Act in regard to fair and affordable care. And we are also looking to our constituency in order to get proper insight from them as to the implications of that. And if you open those doors, there may be difficult and treacherous paths beyond. So them's the breaks, really. So we have done a lot of work on that. We're supported ably by Alan Davis and colleagues in the Mayor's Disability Equality Commission. We're working with Bristol Reclaiming Independent Living, Brill, with Weshill, with Black South West Network, with Black Carers Organisation and Chinese Carers. We're working with a range of organisations. Helen and I, about 3 years ago, set up an Equalities Forum for adult social care, which covers a significant range of geographical and communities of interest in order that we can get these conversations going. So a real effort has been made in order to do that. But as I say, open the door, all sorts of, contentious stuff will emerge. We have got a comms person who's working with us on the adult social care transformation. And she's supporting us to develop internal messages and external messages. Also, the people to work, especially the work around the new target operating model, is very bottom up and very focused on the people that are actually working on and delivering services. So that work is fundamentally based in comms and discussion with people that are working on the services that we deliver.
Just to add to that, if you look back on Tuesday, I know that there was a lot of other stuff going on, but the reports from the mayoral commissions, the Disability Commission, talked about the work that we're doing on co-production, and we referred to that in the response. But oh God, my mind's gone completely blank. Oh yes, as a result of the representations about the fair and affordable, we've extended the consultation, so it's open till the end of January. There's an easy read version, and just to kind of add to what Hugh's just said, it was our Adult Social Care Equality Forum on Wednesday afternoon, and one of the major items on that was that we went through the easy read version of the budget consultation with them. So we are trying to reach out to those groups and the representatives of all kinds of different communities and disabilities in doing that. But as Hugh said, sometimes that means that you hear things that you don't want to hear, but it's right that you hear those.
Could I just say that? Yeah, thanks to both of you. That's encouraging, really reassuring in lots of ways. Purely from, but if the representations go a certain way, there could be asks for things that aren't what might be proposed. So does that introduce a risk purely from this sort of budget side of things? I mean, I know there's lots of other good reasons to do all sorts of things.
All the conversations we have are premised on the understanding that being involved in the conversation doesn't mean you get what you want. It's all about compromise, it's all about negotiation. And at the forefront of all of the conversations, for example, the budget conversation that happened on Wednesday, is this basic idea that we're in extremely tight financial circumstances, so we've got to work together to find solutions to those issues.
Tim? Oh.
I have not been around for the length of time of Jeff and Helen to experience previous adult social care transformations. So, but I just wanted to know, hearing this and perhaps things not being as successful in the past, I was really interested, where are we learning from? Obviously, lots of local authorities are going to be going through challenges, well, in the same budget, similar or not similar, but I'd be really interested, do you have examples of where it's been done well? Where are we copying? Where are we following? Are we confident because others have done similar activities and we're learning from that?
So I think working through organisations, obviously like the LGA, Hugh is a very active member of ADAS, the Association of Directors of Adult Social Care. There's a South West Councils host a lead members network, I think it's called, which meets every couple of months. Last week, for example, I was at their meeting online. We used to all have to trek down to Taunton, but it's all online now about the new, I can't remember what it's called, but the carers, the accessible...
The
Accelerator reform grant that is available now from government for work with carers. And so all of the local authorities, all of the social care authorities come to that, or can come. So, as you might imagine, that's not a Labour forum, because there's only 3 Labour authorities, 3 social care Labour authorities in the southwest region. It's all of us sharing our experience, and it's completely cross-party and very, very supportive. So we hear best practice from what people are doing. We hear about people's challenges at those, and I do think that we're drawing that experience in. And this week, we've had the LGA doing a peer review in preparation for the CQC inspections that are starting next week, and some of your colleagues have been at those sessions, and obviously when we get the findings of that, there's real learning in there.
Yeah. Yes.
So in regards to children's and education, I suppose the slight difference is I was brought in as a consultant. My background is delivering large-scale transformation programs, both in children's education, but also within areas like housing. So the advantages there is I'm not a children's, social worker, and actually to deliver children's and education transformation programs, that's not what you need. The advantage I suppose I have is I have worked across the country in both cities, London boroughs, unitary authorities. So I am bringing that back there, that best practice. I'm well connected with those authorities still, so where I'm still connected with others that are going, say, through the same issues around something like home to school travel, is working alongside them and looking at those opportunities. As you'll see, is some of the proposals both in the budget and obviously the Invest to Save. I have sort of large experience. I do look at the finances as our finance colleagues, so I really do scrutinise and really push on the sort of both the directors and the heads of service. And that challenge needs to be brought in. We are, as part of some of our redesign work, we are involving the Children's Council, our parents forums, and we are engaging, because some of those bottlenecks that we have in our systems actually will deliver savings at the same time, make it more efficient and effective. Children's and education in the past has not used technology to its best. So a good example is we have some work currently going on around home to school travel, where we're looking at that. We've also got some work where obviously there is a national policy at the moment to deliver more digital opportunities around SEND and our EHCPs. So we're actually going to be leading the way for the council in using artificial intelligence and bots, and they'll be done as proof of concepts so that we really get that understanding. And I think one of the things that I found when I sort of came to Bristol was actually we're not working as one. So they weren't working with, say, housing colleagues, they weren't working with property colleagues, they weren't working with adult social care colleagues. To deliver the savings from both the financial but better outcomes for our children, you do need to work as one. You need to make those hard decisions around where the priorities will sit when it comes to the accommodation. Whilst I may not have the same numbers as, say, adult social care, as all of you will be aware, the placement of a child in external supported accommodation is huge. As you would have read in the national papers recently, some of these children, especially with their high complex needs, can cost authorities up to £1 million a year. But actually we can do things, provide that support in-house by bringing in the right provision and accommodation. But we also need to challenge some of that support, step down. We also need to challenge our providers. So an example, we have got decision papers, so to give you that assurance, something is already changing. You'll see a number of decision papers, some have already gone through Cabinet, some are coming up in January and February, where actually we're starting making those changes. We also need to look at alternative delivery models. We need to work with the voluntary sector our social enterprises. We're really, you know, Bristol has a real good opportunity there. So I am in discussions with them already to look at things, alternative delivery around home to school travel, how we can sort of actually have a hybrid model. We may have a small fleet ourselves, which can be used not just for home to school travel, but also used for other services. From a social enterprise, I know for a fact very successfully, if we can use our voluntary sectors, they can provide really good support around escorts and things like that. To reduce our costs, and I know that you're all fully aware of the pressures that we have, we need to bring more foster carers into the system, and you'll see, and I'll talk more about that in the second part.
Tim and then John.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I do appreciate Hugh's boundless enthusiasm but I think we've just seen a perfect example of how you can get yourself into trouble by being a bit too enthusiastic about you know how well you're doing, and that's probably why we're in this mess in the first place. Helen, to your point about rather than doing bad things well, we need to be doing the right things. You know, which is I totally agree with. But we had a really good presentation from Bristol Women's Voice last week at our Labour group about investing in the caring economy. And my real worry is about where we're baselining what good is these days because of the amount of, you know, funding cuts we've had over the years and where we are, and the danger that we now think that good is nowhere near as good as maybe it should be in terms of the care that we're actually providing to people. I was just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Interestingly, the work on the caring economy, I sit on the Women's Commission, so I've been part of that, although not doing the detailed work, which has been fantastic, actually. But we had a joint session of the Health and Wellbeing Board and the Economy and Skills Board recently about workforce, because one of the things that's been very much in the forefront of my mind is that there are workforce shortages in health and care, yes, but there are also, I better not talk about bus drivers, had I? But you know, there are workforce shortages in hospitality, in retail, right across every sector. And so one of the things that I've been very clear about is that what we want to be doing is getting more people economically active. So that includes people with learning disabilities. It includes some of the hard to reach, again, it's not an expression I like, but communities. So alongside that work about the caring economy, although on that, by us signing up to the Unison Ethical Care Charter, that means that we're signed up to our providers paying the living wage to the home care workers. And what's happened as a result of that is there's much more stability in the home care market, because who knew paying people decently meant that they stick around in those jobs. So some of our providers have found recruitment and retention easier since they did that. But we've also got a fantastic piece of work, which again we've showcased this week to the peer reviewers, and they've fed back that they thought it was groundbreaking. Really, it's a piece of work called Make It Work. So we've used Black South West Network to work with some of those small voluntary sector organisation or SMEs as well in the inner city largely, to make sure that they, rather than us just wishing that we had a more diverse set of providers, working with those organisations to be able to go through the hoops that they have to get themselves CQC registered, all of those kinds of things. And the result of that work has been that one of those, it's led by a Somali woman actually, Prime Way Care, is now our biggest home care provider. And she is able to reach into those communities, attract people from those communities into thinking, yes, they can work in health and care, and that's a pathway potentially through to healthcare assistant, nursing training, etc. So I think what I'm saying there is that gives us much better bangs for our bucks in contracting with an organisation like that, where it's the fund, the money stays within Bristol because those people are working for our residents, but also spending their money in local shops and so on. So in terms of the local economy, and it's a better outcome for people because the workforce reflects the client base as well, much better. So I think that it isn't a race to the bottom. We are recognising that, if we're going to, I think again we said it to the peer reviewers this week, if we're going to be spending £200 million, far better to spend it in Bristol and get the economic benefit as well as getting better services for local people. So that doesn't entirely answer your question, but I just think that the caring economy work is really informing what we're doing in adult social care, in children's. They're taking it to Dan to get it into the economy and skills work that he's doing. So it's out there, and we're really benefiting from the work that they've done on that.
I mean, put it another way, the highest performing adult social care services in the country are not in any way the most expensive. So there is obviously pressure in the whole system, and one of the other peer groups that we haven't mentioned is core cities. The core cities are all suffering the same issue on adult social care, children's and education and temporary accommodation. It's a structural systemic problem, and it's not going away because there's no long-term solution being offered around the funding of adult social care. But within that, below that, there is a vast opportunity to do things better within the funding envelopes we have, because the evidence is all around us that different local authorities perform differently with no apparent correlation with to the unit cost of what they do. So there's lots of scope. More cost effective doesn't mean worse in any sense.
Yeah, I suppose my question would be, in terms of how you measure a good performing local authority, how do you measure the quality of what's being provided as well as the cost, the unit cost of providing care, sort of thing? So that's the sort of question I'm asking there. But I guess I'm also just asking, if we were to say in any given instance, what do we think is the proper level of care for this person? Are we able to deliver that, or are we, because of our funding crisis, having to deliver something less than that?
I think there's a couple of things. One is that adult social care is now going to be under the gaze of a regulator. So the CQC is starting those inspections in the new year. We don't know yet. Well, we know we're not one of the first three. They've announced who the first three are, but and you do get a little bit more warning than Ofsted gives, but it is the equivalent of Ofsted. Our providers are all CQC assessed as well, and I think we are proud that actually, if you have a look at, so a report comes to me every month or 2 months about the quality of the providers in Bristol, and we're consistently about 10% above the national average. So I think all of our providers, bar about 5%, yeah, so 95% of the providers in Bristol are rated good or outstanding by CQC. So I think that says something about the work that we do alongside our providers to make sure that they are meeting those standards. But the obvious one is the feedback that we get. So this refers back to the question that Martin asked about co-production and the consultation. We want to hear people's experience of the services, and we're increasingly getting more ways that they can feed those views into us about what they feel about the services they get. And as I've already said, it's not always going to be good, but we need to hear it.
I think just taking the points that you've made, Tim, I think almost from different political perspectives, I hope we'd share a similar view in that I've always wanted to see adult social care delivering effectively and efficiently value for money, but it has to be the service that's needed. And what to me is what's very positive about the comments that Helen and Hugh and Stephen have made is that what we're seeing is potential of changing the way we do things and producing a better service at potentially less cost. And as long as we can be assured by our professionals that we're doing that, then I believe we're heading in the right direction. Where I feel uncomfortable is when I see budget savings that look to me simply like cuts to the service, because it is absolutely paramount that our residents receive the level of service that they need. We all get this as ward members, where we might be here questioning whether we're spending too much and whether the gatekeeping is working properly. But when we have a resident approach us, the one thing we want to do is make sure they're getting the level of support that they need and deserve. My experience with residents, however, also comes back to the communication issue. That actually, if the communication explains to them why they're getting the service that they're getting, they might not like it, but they can understand where their frustration arises is when they don't get that communication and they're left with some level of uncertainty. And I suspect that those who are receiving too much of a package of service are as uncomfortable as those who are receiving too little. And that it's those aspects that we have to get right. But that seems to me as what I've heard today is actually as positive a presentation as we've had in any budget session I can remember. So that to me is very positive. John.
Thanks, Chair. I wanted to make a general point and then a specific question. The general point is that this transformation programme is absolutely essential for the council, the whole of the council. There's no doubt about that. If we get it right, fantastic. If we get it wrong, it could be a disaster. And hopefully officers understand that our occasional questioning, scepticism and very occasional cynicism based on past experience doesn't actually mean that we don't support it, and we are passionately behind you on this. So please, it really is important. We want you to be ambitious, we want you to be brave, we want you to be bold with the transformation programme. The specific question is this, and it's something that Vanessa sort of was talking about, so I hope I'm not jumping the gun and stealing your thunder from the next presentation, but I wanted to ask the question now. We in Resources have said for a long time that invest to save is the only way forward. And that's using capital. So we can do it. The capital is there to do it. And on children's services, we've been saying, look, placing children outside our local authority is incredibly expensive, hugely expensive. And now the papers have picked up on it, and there are some national papers looking at it, not just at Bristol, but at other local authorities. Now, we've said for ages here on this commission, why don't we have our own, can we not build some capacity locally? And Heather's been championing it, and we've all been talking about it. How close are we to getting that? That's the question.
Well, first of all, we're extremely close. So as you will see through the proposals in the capital, we are looking at two aspects. So, and to deal with those expensive placements outside of the area, and it comes back to actually better outcomes. Obviously, like adult social care, we're heavily scrutinised by Ofsted and inspections. But actually, the better outcomes, the better quality of care is within Bristol, not placing people out of area. And some of those, placements are, further than what anyone would ever want to be. That's not what is right for those children. So the key two big capital programmes, one is around children's homes and children's sufficiency, and that's tackling around placements. So that's where we already know, for example, and I know from best practice, is where you look at capital and invest in small children's homes, disabled children's homes. So you've got to look at the different needs. So an example would be, for example, the two properties at Lockleys, the type of support there, you put those highest cost placements in there, and we have. So that takes away huge cost for the council, but actually means we're getting the right support and the right placing them in the best area within Bristol as well to support their needs. Other things, so I'm one of those people, and I agree. When I came across children's and education, everything was about cost avoidance, and rightly so, I was challenged about that. But we do need to look at both. You need to prevent what's coming into our system, but also deal what we've already got in our system. So some of the children's sufficiency in capital is about dealing what's coming into the system. So having that crisis pad is one of the proposals. So that will assess children that potentially could come into the system, is working with them, working to see actually could we support them back with their families with the right support package around them, but also providing that emergency accommodation. And as you're all fully aware, emergency accommodation in children's is very expensive. It is not a good use of, and some of those emergency placements potentially could be in unregistered accommodation, which again is not allowed for local authorities. So being able to do that, we can actually assess their needs and ensure that we're placing them with the right support in different ways. But actually for us, I will have to still look at those costs, and I challenge those costs. You know, we do need to. You can provide the right support in different ways, and we do have some really good organisations within Bristol that we should be using a lot more. Then we've also got dealing with our sort of high numbers of unaccompanied asylum seekers that are coming into the system. And actually what you need to look at is how you can work with them and provide slightly different accommodation. So as you would have seen, we are looking at some larger properties where we would actually be able to house, say, for example, 5 or 6. They wouldn't need this such intense support, but you do need to prepare them going into the wider world, as I say, and having to take that responsibility. And you probably would have seen this across the country, where you look at having a foyer and it has a step down process. So within that accommodation, you've got the initial intense support. Then you start to step them down, still in the same accommodation, but we give them a bit of a wraparound. And that third stage within that is learning how to manage their own bills, how they're going to start taking that before we start moving them on. So we have got that. The other way to deal with our placement costs, as you know, is getting more foster carers. I am fully aware, and I have read the previous children's and education transformation programs that have gone over the years. And you're right, they have had the same things on there. The proof will only be when you start seeing it happening and start seeing those homes. Foster carers, though, we know, evidence is out there. The more foster carers we can get into the system, that again reduces the cost, and that is the best outcomes for a large proportion of our children and young people. So one of the things that Bristol has never looked at and never implemented is a foster care policy, where actually we can offer loans, we can offer grants to help with things like extensions, with adaptations to their homes. We have some amazing foster carers who could potentially take on more children if, for example, their accommodation, they had an extension. But even small things for loans and grants, for example, for some people it's having a bigger vehicle. That's all. They've got the right size property, but it's having that big, or some of the white goods that would go with that. So as part, obviously, if the capital investor save is approved, then obviously that will be the next step. But in the meantime, I'm already working on those in the hope that everything gets approved.
Thank you for your answer, and thank you for what you're doing as well. It's very important.
Councillor, just to build on that, I mean, what you're describing is having commercial thinking inside services, and it's a massive challenge. It's no good coming up with the idea, because I think we all agree. It's how do you make it happen? And we need to make sure that we give people both the space when they are in danger of being overrun by the demand, which you need to service without negotiation at the front door, and the capability, which is quite hard to come by in local government, to do these deals, the confidence to be able to talk to people about capital, finance, building type stuff. Now, we have a capital program team. They have done lots of projects to do with regeneration. They actually do the education capital work as well. So we do have these capabilities, and we need we need a few more people like Ness who can bring that confidence of how to translate an obvious, very good idea into capable delivery. It is about that capability, and it is about that leadership.
Denise?
Sorry, I do need to come in to bring some realism to the discussion. Apologies, I might be the voice of doom and gloom. So if we look at the areas that we are discussing today, predominantly children's and education, adults, housing, they currently represent 80% of our net service budget and growing. So if we don't transform and we don't make some really radical decisions in some areas, we will be in danger of being an authority that only delivers those areas over the next few years. So the transformation work that is underway and is being developed, that can very quickly be outstripped by demand and market prices. So one keeps overtaking the other. So we'll have the transformation programs, but as you see when you look at the in-year budgets for this year and you look at the in-year budgets for last year, we're transforming, we're delivering the savings, but we're being outstripped by demand and market conditions and market prices. So it will require some difficult decisions. So it sounds very easy, hence I've had to step in because my view is that it's not that easy. If it was that easy, we would have done all of this previously. It is difficult, and it does mean that as a council, we will need to make some difficult decisions amongst those transformations because it requires new operating models. It will require some tough commercial decisions with some of the delivery partners and sectors. So we need to be ready for that because clearly there's going to be need to renegotiate some difficult contracts as well as part of that commissioning capability, commissioning tell, and that will, invariably have some challenges for yourselves as members as some of those decisions are taking place. I think the other thing that is at the heart, and when you sort of say, well, what's different this time and what is it that's going to be different, the bit that's critical for me that absolutely needs to be there is culture change. Because quite often you have the senior leaders like ourselves at the top, we all get it, we all buy into it, etc., and we're all delivering this, but we also have to have the change in culture, and the decisions, the discussions needs to communicate from the top and cascade down the organisation to really try to change the curve. Because I think what we have seen as part of the exercises that have taken place throughout the course of this year and all of the additional expertise that's come through our delivery partners is that they've done the diagnostics, and they have obviously evidenced the types of things that I'm always saying is that throwing more money at it and greater money, more money is a fallacy that it's actually delivering improved outcomes. It's not in many areas. And the evidence has demonstrated that in some areas we haven't had improved outcomes. We're just spending more because we're making quick decisions. We don't have the capacity, we don't have the skills and capability to be able to appropriately negotiate and to actually meet that need. So I think putting that lens up to us has been really helpful this year in terms of all of the work to say actually you're over-commissioning in some areas, and actually when you do the case reviews, you haven't had an improved outcome. So actually I think having that sort of message played back to us in many areas says, this is where you need to do things differently, this is how we need to change, but that needs to actually really permeate throughout the organisation, so there is a realisation that actually by just sort of commissioning, I don't know whether it's greater home care or greater hours of care, that doesn't mean that they've actually had the time to really sit with the service user or the customer, truly understand the need and what is it that's going to make the difference. So I think there's an element of the needing the capacity, needing that area where colleagues will all be supported by members, because there's going to need to be some brave decisions. And if we are planning for a future scenario where there could be even further reductions and cuts, we've got to sort of say, where is the resilience? What are we going to do differently, and what does that operating model look like? So I wouldn't want you to leave today thinking it's all really easy and there's no tough decisions here, because it absolutely isn't, and it's going to be tough as you go forward.
Denise, if I perhaps throw a further sort of question back at you, in the sense that I understand, and I think members understand, the dynamic between scrutiny and administration and officers as things stand at the moment. From May, that's going to be a very different dynamic. And that question of how those challenges are stimulated through the committee system is going to be key. Part of it is going to fall to the finance team to be raising those challenges, but somehow I think as members we also need to make sure that the mechanism for members providing that stimulus and challenge and carrying on asking those questions that Scrutiny has asked is going to be fundamental to making that work and have the equilibrium between members and officers.
Yeah, I think in terms of comments, I'd absolutely agree. And I think the way in which we've managed to operate as a task and finish group and the type of sessions that we're able to have in closed sessions, we almost need to say, how do we translate that into a fit-for-purpose public session? Because that's the type of, of engagement that you need to be able to have as well, based on that sort of ability to be able to present things and actually have those open discussions, go on the journey, be really clear in terms of the decisions that need to be made as part of that process, but one that's based on also trust, evidence-based. So it's going to be really key for ourselves as officers to bring the evidence and the details and the supporting information so that we can have those robust conversations, but recognising that we also need to accept that there will be failures, particularly where you're trying to transform or you're trying to do something innovative, that there needs to be the space for colleagues to explore and to fail. And it is something that quite often in many councils we don't seem to accept failure, but you need to if you're going to try to do innovative things and be a bit more commercial in your approach. Not everything is going to work, and officers will need to be able to be open and honest about what is working, given the opportunity, but I say, fail fast and move forward quickly and do it with a real risk awareness.
Steve.
So I will be bringing forward a proposal around a case for change and a new operating model, which I'm discussing currently with the administration. But my idea is that is a piece of work that we start this side of an election, but making sure that it has that cross-party understanding. So we go into a period of intense work with members from May to look at what are the underlying principles and what is the operating model we can afford and that the city needs. So the work is starting now, and I will be talking to party group leaders in the next couple of months.
Okay, thank you. Members, I have a further question, but I just want to check whether anybody else has anything, particularly Mark or Andrew. Do you have anything you... No? No, in which case, I'm feeling very concerned that John has been sat there without any questions thrown at him for a while, and I don't want you to feel left out, John. I just wanted to ask a question on the property side of things, and I understand all the ideas about rationalising our office holdings and looking at our returns. I have a concern about the properties that, as far as I'm aware, don't give us any return, but therefore have costs. And I'm thinking specifically of either Ashton Court or the Corn Exchange, for example. And those have been, as far as I'm aware, vacant or substantially vacant for some period of time. Are there plans afoot to actually look at how we utilise those unused spaces, because they are a drain on us as much as others that are not performing as much as they should be, but in a sense don't feature because they don't have an income coming in, so aren't part of a yield or anything else. And is that part of the transformation programme? And if it's not, should it be?
Thank you, Chair. Certainly we've looked at across the estate for the opportunities, both in terms of the office estate, the operational estate and the investment estate, the sort of three key areas. You're right, there are properties that are currently vacant which are costing us, and we've certainly looked at individual cases about potential to bring in investment and to try and bring income for those. But that again is part of the challenge and the trade-off really, in terms of trying to bring forward a case which pays back sufficiently quickly with the other pressures and on utilisation of that sort of capital. But yes, I mean, certainly all of those aspects are up for review. Chair. I mean, what we've done is we prioritised, as part of the first phase of this review, looking at those things which were obvious that, you know, there wasn't a revenue coming in. There were things which operationally there wasn't going to be the utilisation of, and there's no easy things in terms of council assets and potential disposals, as I'm sure you're aware, but that we're on at that end of the scale. We have, however, a 4-year programme, so we're looking at all of that as part of that. So that will include obviously getting political views on things like you know, particular assets like you mentioned, Ashton Court. You know, that would obviously be a key thing to look at, what the potential uses are for that.
Okay, thank you. Members, I think we've probably reached the as far as we can go on transformation programme. So thank you all for presenting on that. I suggest that we have a 5-minute comfort break at this point, if only to recalibrate our minds into thinking specifically about children and adult social care. And that will give members a chance to grab a cup of tea or coffee and hopefully relieve me of a few mince pies. So if we have a 5-minute break.
What happened to the 10 o'clock fire alarm?
Oh, I think maybe they thought they wouldn't expose us twice, because there was one, an accidental
So we move on to the second part of this agenda, which is children and education and adult social care. And Helen's doing a sterling job of being the only cabinet member well enough to be with us. So so thank you again for that. So I don't know quite how we want to play this. Do we just want to go into questions from members? Yeah. Okay. Who'd like to start the ball rolling? Right. Okay. So the first question that we've got down here for both services is back to the confidence level around delivery of the individual proposals, and as importantly how those are going to be tracked and monitored. And I think this sort of comes back to, if you like, the points I made in the first section of a lot of these we've seen and heard before. So perhaps the added question is how is it going to be different this time round? Yeah. No.
So I suppose, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, the sort of scrutiny of whatever we're doing, so includes obviously the budget and the capital proposals here. The difference is from anything going forward is looked through our families' eyes and programme board, and as part of that, and as part of the board, we've set up a scoreboard monitoring. So we have some, against each of the key work streams, and this includes obviously both the budget proposals and the capital proposals will be part of that. We have looked at very more robust ways of monitoring. So looking at things, for example, our percentage increase in the conversion rate of children in care moving from external supported accommodation to in-house provision. It's things like those conversion rates and monitoring it that. It's not just simply looking at how many children are placed within house provision. We need to see that from a fostering point of view. What you want to see is a more robust way, and the way we're looking at monitoring of that is what's the percentage increase that we're seeing in inquiries, and we've set quite a robust one, and set that Southwest Recruitment Hub is behind that. But then what you want to understand, what percentage of those, what was the conversion rate into that sort of initial inquiry into action approval, and then looking at the long-term sustainability of those foster carers. Are we being able to retain them now longer because of the measures we're putting in place? And that's really key. Confidence-wise, we challenge it, and I would say at the moment from a programme and in regards to these reducing our cost of placements and fostering specifically, it is early days. I think from my own experience, based on best practice, also based on the work that Newton did around our enhanced diagnostic, that actually I am very confident in these proposals. I know other authorities have put them in place. I think for us, it's about pushing hard and having the right resource behind it. But, I'm always welcome to be scrutinised and heavily scrutinised and be challenged. I think the confidence is around literally proving it, but also we need to do it, sort of monitor it as well, a lot heavier. And I think, Denise picked up a point. We need stronger, the culture change within the services, especially around finances is key to this as part. So I am confident. But, our programme and these deliverables are not just within 24-25, and we have to be realistic about that. But, I've clearly, there are non-financial benefits as well as financial benefits from all of the proposals, and I'm happy to pick those up later on. I'll hand over to Hugh.
Thanks, Vanessa. It's. I think likewise we're confident, I think, because we're confident in our delivery partner, People 2. People 2 come with a proven track record in other contexts of delivering equivalent efficiencies and savings and system and cultural kind of progress in previous years, so in similar ways. And all of the projects that you'll see in the list of 8 that we've got are all being delivered by People 2, all 8 of them. 4 of them are already actually underway. So the commencement of them and the kind of inception phase has happened, and we're already working, getting geared up so that we'll be hitting the ground fully running by April for the full year effect next year. I think we're thinking a confidence rating of around 70%, and that's for a range of reasons. But the primary one, I think, is around the potential additionality of demand that Denise mentioned earlier, because there's so many unpredictables in regard to what demand our services will be placed under when it comes to winter pressures and when it comes to kind of demographic demand, etc. As I said earlier, we're experiencing at the moment about a 4% growth in demand year on year. So the projects are already underway. You'll see that the emphasis of them is variable, but they do tend to be premised on reviewing existing activity. And I will say that there's quite a significant requirement for that, especially given the change in emphasis of operational practice during the COVID period and the kind of backlogs that have built up since then. In COVID, we spent the majority of our time and effort on working on immediate presenting challenges of hospital pressures and what have you, and that's carried on to an extent because of the pressures the NHS is under in the ensuing year. So we have got quite a lot to go at when it comes to the reviewing and ratification of our long-term committed spend. If you imagine the amount of money we spend each year, I always speculate that something along the lines of 75% of it is long-term committed spend, and that's where the money sits. And then 25% will be churn, people stopping receiving services for whatever reason and new people coming in. So things like complex home care reviews, we've brought in additional capacity to review, 50 plus more complex home care cases a month, to review people when they come out of hospital, because one of the areas that we know through the diagnostic work that's taken place that we know we overspend is when people come out of hospital, they get prescribed quite high levels of care due to their presenting needs at that time, and then they're not reviewed they're not reviewed contemporaneously. They go on for a long period of time with the same level of care. And as we, I think, mentioned earlier, having too much care and support can be detrimental to people as much as having too little. And then there are other areas of reviewing work where we're talking about the potential for working with high-cost providers. Now, we've got a good track record on this already. We use a nationally recognised tool called Care Cubed, and we go to particular providers. At the moment, we've been doing it recently, mainly with providers that we've got 3-4 plus numbers of placements with, and we've been reviewing them all, and we can get really quite analytical about the cost of particular placements and the component elements that make up those costs, and we invariably come away with having negotiated a reduced rate. So it's that kind of work that we're doing, systematic operational work, but also commissioning orientated work that works with providers in order to develop better rates for the care that we buy. So I think we can show that it's already starting to work, but there's more potential in upcoming months.
Thank you, Hugh. Yeah, Heather.
I think that was the sort of answer that covered probably loads of our questions, and we also got onto lots about children's earlier, so I feel like lots of our questions have probably been answered. I was looking at the improved reablement saving 25, and I was just wondering, would you need occupational therapists? Is there, in order to deliver that, is there the workforce available? Are there any other concerns about being able to deliver that?
I think custom and practice and systems is the first consideration. We have got a shortfall in the reablement workforce, but I can assure you that the analytical work we've done shows that what we have got, we're not using to maximum benefit or effect. So there's two sides to it. We've got a rolling recruitment programme, so we are seeking to recruit to capacity in reablement, because I think people too have highlighted from experience in other areas the importance of having good solid reablement capacity. But then it's also about criteria, what they will and won't accept, and about the duration of cases and the types of cases that they do. And so we're involved at the moment. The hospitals are at very high levels. It's called OPAL 4, which is operational pressures emergency level, I think, OPAL, but OPAL 4 at the moment, and we're encouraging Serona Care and Health to refer more people through to our reablement service because we've got capacity. Serona have referred 22 cases through to reablement this week. Reablement have taken 22 cases. So we're already in the process of actually opening out our reablement service and making it more readily available so that it can be used for step-down purposes, and it can be used to minimise people's levels of need before they then move on to a long-term care package. And that's addressing that kind of over-prescription when people come out of hospital, and then 6 weeks, 12 weeks later, they quite often need quite a lot less.
Can I just ask on that assessment? You're convincing us that the power of that assessment and the potential savings. How can you be sure you keep the resources to keep that up year in, year out, rather than next time there's a recruitment freeze, finding that gets left, and before we know it, again, those high-level packages are being maintained for 12 months when they only need to be for 4 weeks? How does that become prioritised in the system that it becomes the norm?
In the recent, we have had recruitment freezes in the last couple of years, and in each of those recruitment freezes, we had potential exemptions for adult social care services because of the frontline importance of them in regard to, maintaining flow and also maintaining cost effectiveness. So I wouldn't, if we, and we will be able to demonstrate that these services are paying for themselves and they're cost effective, and so therefore they'll have built in within them the argument that to restrict them or reduce them wouldn't be a cost effective thing to do. So I'm confident that, if we do have a position in the future where we do have to restrict recruitment, that we'd make similar arguments for adult social care if those services are proving to be cost effective.
So just being devil's advocate, really, because you know there have been other cases where there have been fantastic initiatives that happen for a period of time because they happen to be a target that either central government or you as a department have identified, and somehow they don't remain is such a key target, even though they're fundamental to the delivery. And I suppose it's back to culture, and how is that embedded in the system in such a way that it's going to carry on doing that work until an alternative to achieve a better outcome is found.
I mean, if you look at how the government, how central government talks about adult social care and also the NHS, adult social care is primarily, if ever, referred to as an adjunct to the NHS, and the NHS is primarily referred to as the flow through the hospital service and the delays that are inherent in that part of the system. So I don't see, and things like reablement and, the step down discharge to assess, it's called D2A, you may have heard of, and things like Home First, those initiatives are the national standards. So if there's a significant shift in government policy that suggests a new or better or different or cheaper way of doing that, then, we'll be subject to that. But as it is at the moment, things like reablement are pretty much the standard modus operandi for health and care systems across the country. So I don't envisage necessarily that there'll be any significant change. Also, it's, you know, it is the funding that we know within our Better Care Fund is bound up to deliver against that. Because it's the main funding that we have from the NHS that's about system performance and system delivery.
That's Stephen and then Ness.
One of the key points is, I think, when all the consultants leave, does the behaviour stick? And, you know, initiatives come and go nationally. You know, new money, new funding streams, it's normally short-term money about winter time. What we've said time and time again today is culture is critical, culture and skills really, and to make this really stick is to imbue in our managers a mindset that blends the need to deliver fair and affordable care every day, every week, also giving them access to the right information, because sometimes the tools they really need to know how they're managing those two things aren't as available as they need to be. So it's definitely about what goes on in the minds and in the daily practice of at least team leaders, if not below that level. And that's a long journey.
That actually prompts me, not really for a discussion now, but one of my concerns is representing a ward where most people are self-funded, is still the issue of how they find the support that they need, because too often they become dependent on the authority or the health service because they haven't the knowledge to pursue that support soon enough. And whichever part of the care system ends up funding those short-term issues, it is an unnecessary pressure. And whilst we shouldn't be incurring costs in providing support for them, somehow helping to make the system more intelligible so that they know what support is potentially available could actually make a massive impact on the pressures on the service.
It's part of our statutory duty to support all people who require care as they require it, to give them the support they need. At present, I think I just read it earlier, of the 26 people that we're supporting out of hospital through pathways 2 and 3 at the moment, 8 of those are self-funders. And they're entitled to free at the point of use service as much as anybody else. And the reablement part of the service, there's some elements that are chargeable, but you know, if people want to use reablement services who are self-funding, they can. The NHS bits in the Home First system are, of course, free at the point of use. So we do regularly, I think, support a good 25% of the people that we work with who are requiring higher level care, who are over 65 are self-funders. So it's just part of the statutory service provision, really.
Just a more general question, actually. Just going back to the previous session, it's quite difficult to decouple this from that previous session. There was talk in the children's sphere around the use of AI and better IT and systems. And I know in adult care, there's been a long-term agenda about using technology to preserve independence and to support people. It's just, how is this connected into the transformation programme around digital? Because clearly, from the council's point of view, our capability to be part of this and to support this sort of work is really long term. And I'd like to think that the digital transformation part, which I know was dealt with separately, is interconnected with all these other aspects as well.
So I represent both children's education and adult social care on the digital transformation board. And so to ensure, a bit like I sit on the estate strategy board, to ensure we have that connection and joined up. So in regards to the artificial intelligence, part of it is that proof of concept, and obviously I involved our digital colleagues and our ICT colleagues are all part of that. And in parallel, what we're doing at the same time is then looking at how that potentially, that proof of how that could be widened across the council. And obviously the other aspect is some work around that sort of dovetails the technology is I've brought someone in to basically around behavioural science and applying behavioural science to what we're doing. Now, part of that is they've come in to upskill our own staff, so they learn how to do it with some areas that we're testing, and then that can be widened out. As part of that piece of work, I invited both adult social care and GNR colleagues, as well as our corporate PMO, because again, we shouldn't be doing this in silo. We might test it in one of our areas, but actually I know that can be broadened out. You then develop that programme. Again, though, it comes back to where we're going to, the money is going to be implemented. Can I just pick up on, Chair, around the culture change as well? So from a children's and education point of view, and culture change is a massive issue here for us in children's and education. So one of the ways it's being addressed, and we just finished our phase 1 consultation, is a new operating model. And as part of that, there is going to be a development programme for our heads of service, and it will be also done with our service managers and managers going forward to really start articulating that culture change required. We have a new executive director coming in February, and she is really passionate and clear about what needs to be driven from a culture point of view. But in regards to, Chair, in your point about that in the past, they've started something, say, for example, the DFE have funded a piece of work, could say like family hubs. What's happened in the past? The services have never looked at what happens at the end of that 3 years, 2 years. So they've never looked at how they themselves are going to sustain that as part of their own model and as part within their budget envelopes. And so that's been my challenge, is some of the commissioning, some of the pieces of what we've invested in this year, over a couple of years, I've challenged back and said we're not getting the outcomes, we're no longer going to invest into that. But something like Family Hubs, part of the new operating model, is addressing that long-term sustainability, and it is really looking at those different aspects. Children's and education cannot carry on in its way in that ending up with unfunded posts because they have not taken that into consideration. And, they are the areas that have to be addressed. But the culture change is big, and I won't, it's not something that can be done in silo in children's and education. As Stephen talked about, that wider operating model, and it's applying that. So one of the pieces of work I've just done with them as part of their opera is taking the culture, values and behaviours of the council and saying to them, what does that mean as a social worker? What does that mean as an educational psychologist? Not changing the values and behaviours, but what does it really mean? And as part of that, some work I did with London Borough of Sutton, we found that really successful, is taking those values, behaviours and understanding what the culture change needed to change within that service. And they do need the biggest culture change in children's and education. They need to see themselves as one, as part of the council, not an organisation within an organisation.
Stephen, and then Hugh.
So I thought that, Councillor, you might be interested to know that at corporate level we are going to be launching a data academy for our staff as part of basically data apprenticeships using our apprenticeship levy funding. And this is something that's going to be in all of these service areas. We hope to have between 50 and 60 people signed up to basically do, in some cases, short form, in some cases, 12-month programs. Because in my view, we've got to go in at the grassroots level. When it comes to digital transformation, we don't do it to teams. We have to do it within teams. And that takes a different language, and I expect a different set of skills. The council of 5 years' time is going to look radically different, like every large organisation. So I would expect to scale that up in the next 2 years. But we're starting very soon with a data academy.
Yeah, I've got a point, and then maybe Helen will come in on the latter part of it. Yeah, we recently had saw a presentation by Norfolk Council, which has got this really rather whizzy AI thing where they're looking at all the different case recording across health and care and drawing out keywords, and have developed quite a good predictive tool that allows you to support people who are going to be at risk of falls within 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. All that stuff, of course, is pretty amazing. But actually, I think the basic thing to say here is that we do have around 1,000 new people a year who have basic technology enhanced care support. So things that are based on the community alarm systems, you know, the thing around the neck, and so fall detectors, movement sensors, lack of movement sensors, heat and cold sensors, flood detectors, those kind of things, GPS things when people have got a tendency, say, medication reminders, you should jump in. But yeah, I mean, so we do a lot of that already, and I think we think that in 22-23 the use of tech as opposed to other care-based solutions would have produced a cost avoidance of around £1.5 million just because of the amount of new people that we've had building it up. We're going to be working now, we are working with Serona Care and Health, so we've got a joint health and care tech offer across the system, and it's used much more upon hospital discharge. So there's a lot of good work already going on, and I'm afraid with all the AI and stuff, the standard tech offer is likely to get ignored, but it is still really a fundamental part of our care offer. And I don't know whether you were going to say about the organisational culture bit. Is that,
Yeah, can I pick that point up about the, short-term funding, or suddenly the, word of the moment from government is this, and then it goes away. But the example I'd use, and no spoilers, but it has been picked out in the what we've seen already of the feedback of the LGA review, is that there's really very good appreciation of the work on the Changing Futures programme. I don't know if people remember that, but it's the one about working with people with 2 or more complex needs. So typically that might be a homeless person with addiction problems and mental health problems. And Second Step is our partner organisation on that. In January, I'm going to bring an additional cabinet report for extending that for a year. But that's another one, a bit like Ness said, where it's short-term, it's a lot of money, and you've been able to work very intensively with that cohort of people, and it's had some very, very, very good results. But it also has to embed as a sustainable change, doesn't it? That once the money dries up, in another 18 months' time, we'll still be working with those people in that way, and we'll have embedded that way of working. You can't just be reliant on those additional funds to do it.
I wanted to jump in on AI. Obviously, there can be a lot of sort of public concern and general concern about how we're using AI. I support and understand how much benefit it can add. So I'm asking this just to reassure that concern. And I guess I don't know much about what as an organisation we have a policy around AI, because obviously there can be sort of systematic bias within AI. And so I'm just interested about how we might be implementing it, especially if it might be making decisions about when we intervene and when we offer support. Yeah, is there any sort of systematic bias, and how do we check for that?
So as you rightly said, it's not the answer for everyone. And, it is about using it sensibly. It is involving, as we said, about the co-production as well. I mean, the wider council from, digital transformation is that policy, that framework to be clear about how we use it, when we use it, and the best way to use it. So if I look at where we've targeted in regards to for both homeschool travel and our EHCPs, is working with our carers, parents forum to really understand where those bottlenecks, they're frustrated, where the technology, for example. And a lot of that is that first point of contact. It is, the frustrations around just sending something via email and things like that, when actually that could be captured straight into the systems. But as you rightly said, I mean, there is a lot out there, and there's arguments about sort of whether AI, any form of digital and technology is an enabler. So we do need to be careful about where we talk about, oh, we can get a reduction in saving. It is an enabler. So you need to also ensure that you're doing your process redesign underneath this. You can't just expect, but you also have to look at that whole end-to-end journey.
If I may, just on this, I think there are definitely 2 points. The first is obviously Ness's point, which is that AI, any form of process automation, won't substitute for a bad business process or one that is not followed consistently by officers. So we need to understand we've got good systems and good ways of doing things before we can work out how to automate them better. And the second point was around the ethics and things like systemic bias, and I do think that's an area which is, obviously, it's something we all hear about in the wider world, but when it's applied to things like public service delivery, there's a definite need for a conversation. We have governance, we have safeguards. Whether they are going far enough in the sense that the public awareness and acceptance of these systems, which are going to be a bigger part of everyone's lives, let's be honest, is an open question. I mean, the answer actually is not open. It's no, clearly not. We're not, in no local authority, no public body, I think, is yet fully embracing the kind of context, the wider public discussion that needs to be had about things like predictive analytics. And I'm really interested to see how we can turn this to an advantage for Bristol, because I actually think the data ethics question is a very interesting one. It's a potential fertile area for us as a city. There's a government organisation called the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation who came down and had a look at some of our early attempts into this world, and they said it's completely legal, it's been done entirely correctly, but we do recommend you have a dialogue with the city, and I don't think anyone is really doing that effectively yet.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, in fact, on very related points, I was actually going to bring up 2 things. Firstly, there's the issues around smart technologies and the benefits of those, which are welcome, and Bristol has had some recognition as a smart city in the past. But I've been involved in some national and international guidance for local government on that, and we have to be conscious when there is the benefit and when this is the right tool or aid, and when there's a product trying to find a market, which is also happening at the same time, companies selling whole solutions and systems, and some of which I was quite shocked by, which, and yet some very beneficial. In terms of the AI, there are also kind of not just ethics concerns, but there are also concerns about the programming. And so because it is an evolving intelligence, arguably, if it becomes part of the process, one of the things is what values have we put into it? Do we know what was programmed in and where it's going? And secondly, and it's not really a budget issue, it's far sort of kind of beyond that. Is there recourse to a human if someone thinks decisions are being made about them and they don't even know what process and what data and what assumptions and values are built in it? So do we guarantee recourse to a human when someone says it's been decided, the computer says, especially if the computer has values that may not be exactly our values? We don't know, necessarily what's gone in or where it's gone as it evolves. So there's some European and other guidance obviously coming out of this, and concerns both in the care field in particular and in other areas like criminal and sort of kind of judgments being made. Because, and I flagged it up because it was said these can show us what might happen, and if there are assumptions about what might happen, we have to say, but will it, or was it right? Just a caution, but I think that has to go somewhere else so we can have that debate.
And I totally accept that, and I suppose a good example is when we've done the process mapping on these particular proof of concepts, worked out which ones, for example, are definitely not up for automation. They still can be a redesign of a process, but definitely the issue. The one thing from the work I've done is where I only look at, for example, AI, is where it's a rules-based assessment, for example. A good example is, for most authorities, you've used artificial intelligence within the areas of revenues and benefits. Sort of 95% of revenues and benefits, in the days of before universal credit came along, was actually a rules-based assessment. We do have rules-based assessments within children's and education. So it's there's the opportunity. It does never ever saying that that's the 100% we're going to go down. You could say, we've seen things like school admissions, haven't we, in the school admissions process where authorities have said that is the only way. A human intervention is still required. AI is a learning tool, and it has to learn a number of assumptions. So in the early stages, you need to remember that. I think from one of our point of view, it is, I've worked with authorities. Buckinghamshire County Council is a good example where they've used artificial intelligence, robotics for both adult social care and sort of children's and education. But you have to go to those authorities to also learn the issues that they face and then realise it's not something you can just roll out across everything. But rules-based assessments is the area to focus on, because that's where you don't need that intervention, that sort of knowledge base and that independent decision making. So you would never use it for the whole of, for example, EHCP process.
Before I go to Helen, just one point in that, though. I think we do need to bear, whilst the ethics issues are absolutely fundamental, and I wouldn't belittle those, if we look at our record for human decision making over the years, the level of consistency is such that the challenge we were open to was significant. So we need to keep that in perspective, and whilst whatever we do might not be perfect, the chances are it's going to be better than the random basis that we may have operated on in the past. Helen.
I was going to say, you can say that, but I couldn't possibly comment. I was going to, because the question was about AI and tech, and just going on to the value of tech as well. And I think it links with what Tim was saying earlier about valuing carers, that actually, if some of the dare I call it drudgery of a care visit, so checking that somebody's had their medications, have they had the kettle on, and are they hydrated because that they've been having drinks. Actually, the value of that visit in human interaction terms, rather than may make some of those jobs more appealing to people, because it is about supporting somebody. So I think that that's true in children's as well. And some of the simplest things that are readily available, so the use of Alexa for people to reduce isolation, certainly interactive doorbells so that people have got control about who they let into their flat or their house, because they can see who's at the door. All of those things, as we know, are standard. So making sure that we've got those very basic forms of tech, as well as the much more complicated ones available for people, can make such a difference to people's lives. I know it's a pain when you're going out canvassing and it's one of those doorbells, but for real people, it can make a real difference.
I'm trying to think through what are we meaning by AI and how far are we looking at going, because sort of my understanding is if we are talking about we have some rules for benefits and working out who gets what benefits, my understanding would be we've been using computers for a long time to apply simple rules, an algorithm to go from here are some rules, here are some numbers, here are some facts, go in, what does someone get? And my understanding, I guess I'm questioning how far we're going here, my understanding of AI is that it is computer learning. It is therefore saying, we've started here and we want to get to this result, and the computer goes and from all of the information available makes some assumptions, and that is where the systematic bias comes. So, I don't know. I want to make an example because I think it is helpful to really think through for all of us where systematic bias might exist. So we might be talking to homeschool transport, and we might be basing it on Do we want to reduce the number of complaints we get about home to school transport? And it might be a case that certain families complain less about their home to school transport than other families. And if the computer just looks at that, and those families that complain less might be in more deprived areas, might not be white. There might be something there. And if a computer looked at it, they might then make a decision on which, I don't know how we're using it, I'm trying to come up with an example that might be relevant. The computer might look at that, and without giving us how they've got to the answer of make these journeys better, prioritise these journeys, would then have systematically, it will have learnt from all of the information available and will have systematically put that process in. And of course, I hope that we do quite a lot to overcome unconscious bias of humans. That's a priority, in terms of training, in terms of... and so I think I'm questioning, because we were talking about putting in simple rules, but my understanding of AI is that it is that learning process that goes well beyond the simple rules that we understand. It's when decisions are being made in a way that we potentially don't understand. And as counsellors, we quite often get the why have I only been offered this amount of care? Why am I on band 2? We quite often get asked, why are these decisions being made? And at the moment, I can go to someone, or I can even often, housing bands, I can tell them exactly why this decision's been made, and that's very important for me. If those processes are going through the learning type of AI, it will get to a point, potentially, where we don't know, and that's where the bias comes in.
Which is exactly why we're treading cautiously into this space. I mean, you can use the example of your credit score as well. Someone may or may not give you a mortgage, but you've got nobody to speak to, right? Or insurance. So I think we're very well aware of this, and to reassure you, our EQIA process will always apply. So if the answer to your question, hypothetical as it is that people who are less likely to complain are likely to be the more marginalised, we would need to be able to show that we had considered that in the EQIA process, and it presumably wouldn't happen. Now, I say presumably because we haven't literally had that conversation, but it is why I'm saying that whilst we have safeguards and we have our processes, I think inevitably in the next years to come, we're going to need to look more closely at how do we create the right assurance framework, because no one knows yet. And I think it's a good conversation, albeit probably not part of a budget consultation scrutiny. I'm very much enjoying it, but we probably do need to go back to the task. But just to say, we do need to come back to this. It's really important.
Tim.
Yeah, thank you. That is an interesting conversation, but I do have some questions about the other budget proposals. So is this the appropriate time to talk about them? Okay. Really what I'm interested in is looking behind the headlines on all of these proposals. And I don't know if I've missed it, but is there anything published that tells us a bit more detail about how we've come to these headline figures? So, for instance, do we have an estimated average cost for placing somebody in a children's home in Bristol compared to the average cost of sending them out of county? And with a lot of these gaps, 18 to 26, I have the same question really, which is it possible to get a breakdown of how many packages we believe will be revised downwards in order to achieve the saving? And presumably with that, there will also be an estimation of how many packages might actually get revised upwards. So how do you get to these figures, and are we allowed to see that level of detail?
So in regards to the second part, Ardy will leave that to either Denise or Stephen to respond. In regards to the proposals, both on children's side, both on the placements and foster care, there is very detailed, especially on the capital, as you can imagine, on the investor save. So it is broken down to that detail. So, and it's not based on just here's an average across. So for the children's homes, we've actually literally illustrated, for example, the size of the children's home. So what would that property cost, for example, if we went to market, rather than looking at, obviously we would like to utilise our own properties as much as possible. How many children will be placed in that? Is there going to be any care? So that's literally looked at. So the initial capital investment for the property, what the ongoing revenue costs, lifetime costs are also within that. We then take, for those particular cohort, are we going to be looking at our high placement children in that, or are we going to be sort of looking at the lower end of our top 10 sort of costs? We've then estimated and looked at that. We've gone, an ESA, for example, external supported accommodation, if that's where they're currently sat, that's about roughly around 2,200 per a week, where actually if we're placing them into this, we already have an indication. So we have that detail, that granular. We also have the numbers of number of children that we already have in the system that then articulates that against. Something like the disabled children's home is, sadly, as you can imagine, that's really expensive at the moment, and rightly so. You need to still will have those investment costs for the support, and that could be, we've looked at that, will have to be a specialist provider still providing the support, but obviously then you still got a lower cost in regards to the provision itself. So that is the granular. On the foster care, in the budget proposal, so that's around the Mockingbird and the Southwest Recruitment Hub, we have detailed financial figures that were done as part of our enhanced diagnostic with Newton and as part of the work with DFE. And we've reviewed that again from a financial perspective. In regards to the capital proposal on foster care sufficiency, so this is the loans. So I suppose the advantage I have is, having worked with authorities on this before, is really understanding that and the number of additional foster carers that we already know. So we already know exactly where the numbers of foster carers coming in, what we're being able to retain. But we already understand why we lose foster carers, and obviously we were talking about this earlier, is about we've got some people out there that would be able to do this, but because they've not got don't have the money for an extension and things like that. So we do have that granular information. And the reason we need that is to be able to do the evidencing, as you talked about, to say, actually, that this is the conversion rate, this is where we've seen that cost reduction. And that's really important, because I still need to be able to report to the Section 151 to make sure I'm delivering that investor save.
Tim, if I can just interject there, because a perfectly valid question, because we do need to know that information is available, but I think that's where the division between resources and people, then we've got to be careful how we play that, because I would expect People Scrutiny Commission to identify areas that they want to dive into much further. I think it might even be a topic that could be appropriate for an all-member briefing at some stage, because I think that background understanding is helpful. But I think there's a danger we could get into too much granular detail for what we can overview, if you like, in terms of the budget. So I think that might be something that we might want to, maybe we can discuss at the scrutiny leads and just talk about whether that is an area that should be looked at in People Commission if they're not already looking at it, and how we proceed.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose my question's really based on scrutinising how we deliver, and knowing what the expectations are, and then 6 months down the line, how much of that have we achieved against what we were expecting to do. That's important. But I take your point. If that's going to be scrutinised by other commissions, then fair enough. But I was just wondering if that information is available to help with that.
I think the other point to make, again, going back, if one compares over time, that information used to be available, but had but the soundness of the way it was made up might not have necessarily met current standards, if you like, whereas the information that is now available is much more forensic and is much more useful to compare with comparator authorities.
I suppose the other thing is, obviously, from our point of view, any of this going forward, there will have to be full decision papers anyway behind us. So, good example on the fostering, we will have to have a clear fostering policy to support that proposal of the loans. We'd have to have a fostering panel behind that, and then you would be doing the monitoring as part of that process. So that detail would come through as part of that decision paper as well, being put forward.
Members, any further questions? No? You've stunned us all into silence.
I could ask some more, Chair.
In which case, if I bring this... Yeah, no, I was going to bring this to a conclusion, but thank you both for bearing the brunt of our questions, much I'm sure to Denise and Sarah's relief. But thank you not only for answering them, but answering them so robustly and in such an informed way. And what I was going to say is I realise for officers and for Helen, I suspect a lot of what we're asking are questions you've been discussing over the past months, but I think for us is backbenchers, the opportunity to ask them and have such an open discussion is actually really extremely helpful. And Hugh, as I've said particularly to you and Helen in the past, that this is done from a point of view of sympathy with the plights and challenges that you have to deal with, rather than in any other negative sense. But really appreciated the way you've engaged with us and responded to us. So thank you for that. Stephen, thank you also for your time. And most of all, members, can I just thank you? This is an incredible group to chaired over the course of the last year. And I think the way we've conducted this questioning to me, is a really positive way. And even when Tim was making a semi-political point earlier, you've come on, Tim, because you made it in such a diplomatic way that I was almost able to agree with you. So, but I think that again is to me how Scrutiny should be working together on dealing with these major issues. So can I thank you all for your time, and just before I declare the meeting closed, may I wish you all a very peaceful Christmas and all the best for the new year. Thank you.